Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
We have today another habitat and migration update for you, and we're going to be speaking with our friend and frequent guest, Aaron Yetter, waterfowl ecologist with the Forbes Biological Station up in Illinois. Aaron, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Mike. How's it going?
It's going okay. I think everyone in this part of the world is ready for a change in the weather. Preferably on the cold side of things. And so that's probably going to be part of our discussion today. You guys up there fly your aerial surveys. I think you're still doing them weekly this time of year, right?
That's correct. We start in early September and go through the midwinter inventory the first week of January.
Okay, I have to always remind myself of that because states do it differently, different frequencies, but y'all are one of the few that do these weekly surveys and have been for a number of years. So you provide us with one of the more regular and frequent sources of data on what you're seeing in terms of duck migrations this time of year. So you're pretty popular in that regard, and we wanted to have you back on and just tell us what you're seeing. I think you actually flew the survey yesterday. We are recording this on December 11th, a Friday. So was it yesterday, the 10th, when you flew the survey?
Yeah, that's correct. We started to fly the survey on Tuesday the 8th, but the weather deteriorated too fast and we had to regroup. And so we flew on the 10th. And so these numbers are hot off the press.
Very good. I guess to set this up for us, tell us what the weather has been like there in Illinois and in your area here over the past week or so.
After Thanksgiving and late November there, we started to get some pretty cool nights down in the 20s. And we started to form some ice, and that pattern went for about a week, I guess, and it gave us some more than sheet water, but we didn't really freeze hard, but we had probably an inch or so of ice in many areas, maybe a little bit more than that. And the birds all kind of congregated in on the December 2nd flight. Had huge numbers of birds in both the Illinois and Mississippi, Central Mississippi River, well above, maybe even close to double what we should have had on the 10-year average. But since then, we thawed out, and the last few days this week, we've been approaching the mid-60s for temperatures and, just getting down to just above freezing at night. So everything thawed out, and for whatever reason, in the last couple of days, last weekend, the birds took off, or about half of them took off in both rivers, it looks like. And went farther south.
So you think some of the birds have moved farther south. And what are you seeing in terms of the species composition of the birds that are still hanging around with you? And I guess of those that would have departed as well. Or do you still have any of the earlier migrants, or are you just still dealing with mostly mallards at this time?
No, we still have a fair number of green-winged teal. The littlest duck is hanging around the longest outside of the mallards. Mallards are known for their cold hardiness, but green wings and still have considerable number of widgeon and shovelers. Most of the scaup have taken off. We do have a few scaup left on some of the big water, but canvasbacks are trickling in, but I think, unless I miss my mark, I think some of the canvasbacks are still north of us, and looking to see them soon, because I had about 48,000 on the Mississippi River on yesterday.
Do you hear? You mentioned a few, I guess, a moment ago that you think this. Maybe some of the birds have moved south. You've lost some of the birds perhaps in a southerly direction. Do you have any indication of whether these birds may be moving east or west? Kind of given what we're seeing with the temperature, this little warm spell. My guess is that, you talked about how last week or earlier this week you had some ice on across the landscape up there. As that ice would have melted with these warming temperatures, is it possible that some of these birds are just kind of distributing laterally to make use of some of that freshly thawed water? Do we have any kind of indication of what may be going on in Iowa or northern Missouri? I think we're going to talk to Andy out of Missouri here soon, but any idea about what may be happening sort of laterally, Avi, there?
I suspect that a portion of the birds that went missing this week did spread back out on the landscape to the recently thawed water. I tried desperately this morning to contact some state biologists in Missouri. I called Ted Shank's State Conservation Area, which holds a large number of birds, and Clarence Cannon Refuge, but I think a lot of places the people are working remotely, and I left a message, but I didn't get a phone call back. I talked to a biologist and friend in southeast Missouri, down by Otter Slough, and he indicated that they did have a push of birds about a week ago, which is a little bit before the birds when I thought they left here. And then some of the I keep touch with some of the big clubs in St. Charles County, Missouri, and just below Quincy, and they seem to think that they still have that the birds didn't leave, that they're still around. So I think it just depends on the area, but I saw reduced numbers of birds along both rivers at every site yesterday.
All right, so we think some of the divers may still be north of us on the big water. Remind me of the type of habitats, the type of wetlands that your survey covers. Is it a mix of kind of deeper water habitats and as well as the shallower moist soil, or is there a tendency for one of those wetland types to be more prominent in your survey? I guess what I'm trying to do is get a feel for whether we're looking mostly at deeper water or kind of semi-permanent water, or are there going to be a number of shallower areas among the areas that you survey?
Yeah, most of the areas that I survey along both rivers, other than Pool 19, are their backwater lakes associated with the river, floodplain lakes that are 0 to 2 feet deep or 3 feet deep on the deep end. So most of them freeze over pretty quickly. And this year, especially last week, the wind kind of laid, and when it got down into the 20s, the wind was laying at night. So there was nothing but the birds to keep the water open. And it did freeze pretty quickly. But Pool 19 and Upper Peoria Lake are bigger waters, and they only had just limited amounts of ice along the fringes, so they stayed open. We mentioned the canvasbacks earlier. I said we had 48, almost 48,000 on the Mississippi, most of those on Pool 19, but that number should be well over 100,000. So that's why I think there's still birds to come as far as the canvasbacks go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sort of leads me to what I wanted to ask you next was a brief discussion of the numbers that you came up with on the survey yesterday. Where are we with regard to some of the more notable species? You just talked about canvasbacks there, but let's say mallards and then some of the more abundant species beyond that. Where are we with our numbers, and how do they compare to what you typically see this time of year?
Last week we were like 2 to 3 times where we should have been on mallards, more than double on both rivers. So we had this big, I don't think it was a big major migration event as much as it was just everything had flooded, and Missouri was out of their split and split hunting season. So everything was being hunted, and what wasn't being hunted was frozen. And so the birds were all really piled into the refuges. And so we had almost 500,000 birds last week, or mallards last week on the Mississippi River, and almost 300,000 on the Illinois River. So we had very large numbers of mallards here. And then this week, when we thawed out, they departed or spread back out.
What are the numbers this year, this week for mallards, if you have that handy?
It's 170,000. So I lost a couple 100,000 mallards on the Mississippi, and the Illinois was 146,000. So that was down about 100,000 as well, a little over 100,000.
Okay, well, so birds are on the move somewhere. We may not be able to exactly pinpoint where they're going, if they went east, west, south, maybe even some of them drifted a bit north. Who knows? But yeah, they're on the move. Hey, related to mallards, what do you see in terms of black ducks up there in your area? Do you have a handle on that? Do you see enough of those to count and kind of register in your totals?
Yep, there's a line for them. The black ducks are usually very incidental. When you see them, they stand out from above in a flock of mallards. They're so black and so dark that they really do pop out. But I had 25 on the Mississippi yesterday and 120 on the Illinois. So there's a few spots that they tend to congregate in those really small numbers, but there's a few spots on the Illinois that they'll stop at that you see them routinely, and one or two spots on the Mississippi.
I was talking with a friend about this earlier this week, just about how black duck numbers have maybe declined at some of the more southerly wintering locations. Do you notice when you look back through your database, do you see that decline in black ducks wintering at your latitude?
Historically, I'm sure we have never had very many black ducks in this part of the world. They're usually just some incidentals. If you see 200 or 300 at one location, that's a pretty good number and something to get excited about. But as far as, maybe back in Belrose's day, there might have been in the 40s and 50s, there might have been a lot more black ducks, but and at least in the last 16 years, the black ducks are pretty minimal.
Okay, so the change that would have occurred probably predates some of the more recent times. Anyway, that's a interesting species that we'll talk about at some point here. Aaron, let's see, what would be the second most numerous duck that you would have counted this week behind mallards? I'm guessing mallard would have been the most abundant on your survey. What would have been second most abundant?
Mallards are abundant and closely followed. Well, I had 66,000 pintails and 51,000 green wings. So the pintails will hang in on those southern clubs down just above St. Louis, and they'll hang in there until it gets really cold. And everywhere else, they kind of bug out. The Illinois River only had 16,000. So there's the pintails, for whatever reason, will hang out with the mallards down there in St. Charles County, Missouri, but everywhere else they kind of get out of the way.
That's interesting. Remind me here what the status of your hunting season is. I think I heard a couple of weeks ago that maybe has it come to a close in the northern part of your state, northern Illinois, but it's still open in southern Illinois? Do I have that right?
Yeah, Illinois is such a long state, north and south. We are divided into 4 zones. So the north zone goes out on the 15th, which is next Tuesday. So those guys are coming quickly. The central zone where I'm at, we go out on December 22nd. And then there's a southeast zone and then a south zone. And those may go all the way to the end of the framework, or I know they go into mid to late January. They don't even come in till around Thanksgiving up here, those southern zones.
Yeah, those southern zones are more or closer to what I'm accustomed to down here in either Tennessee or Mississippi or Louisiana, where I've been over the past few years. So I'm familiar with those later dates. Okay, but it sounds like all zones in your state still have a bit more opportunity to go. What have you heard here lately with regard to hunting success? I know we talked about this briefly on a previous episode. Or is it, I would imagine it's kind of hit or miss given the weather pattern that we're in. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, I know it's my worst duck season ever, and it's probably Illinois' worst duck season in quite a while. I'm 55 years old, and it's my worst duck season. It is Some of the clubs had a really, really good start. In fact, a lot of places had a really, really good start. I talked to one club. They shot 1,000 ducks in the first 20 days and shot less than 200 ducks in the next 20 days. So it's they had a good season, but it's not ending well. And this is the time of year where a lot of the clubs will, as everything starts freezing up, the mallards start to work better in search of food, because their natural food sources are getting frozen, and they tend to work better. But the long range forecast, we're supposed to get a little bit of cold weather Sunday night and a little bit of weather this afternoon tomorrow as far as rain and snow up here. But it's going to warm back up, I believe, and we're not going to have the cold weather to finish the season strong.
That's what I was afraid of, is what I was afraid you were going to tell me. And it sounds like your experience there is similar to what I've heard from some other folks here at similar latitudes and even farther south. Actually, even farther south, I've heard they haven't even had much of a good start. Some of the mid-latitude and northern states were at least able to take advantage of that early cold spell we had, but that was obviously rather short-lived. And so, we're at that time of the year where we need some additional weather to get these birds moving, and we need that weather to come around and be with us for a while. Unfortunately, like you, I've been looking at the weather forecast, and I don't see any of that long, sustained cold weather on the way. But I guess we can, as we usually do, hope that the weather forecasters are going to get it wrong, and then we'll have a major unexpected change here. But Aaron, I think we've covered the high points. Anything else that you wanted that worth talking about here based on what you saw from your surveys, habitat, or I guess maybe that last part is something we can talk about. It's been quite dry in Mississippi, Arkansas, parts of Missouri, Louisiana. I think we've got some rain on the landscape, some water on the landscape here lately. I still think we need quite a bit more, though, to get us where we need to in those states. What do the habitat conditions look like there in Illinois?
Pretty dry. There's one of my colleagues that said the other day it's going to be a great spring migration, because there's a lot of food that still doesn't have water on it. So I think as the normal weather pattern resumes and the rivers start to come up and flood the backwaters and that kind of thing, that next February and March, that we'll have a pretty phenomenal number of birds return and use those resources. But we're dry right now.
Well, okay, Aaron, that's going to wrap it up for us here. I appreciate you joining us here on the podcast again. I appreciate you joining us earlier in the year. This will probably be the last time we speak with you. Well, probably until next year, because I doubt we'll get on the phone between now and the end of the year, and you wrap up your surveys in early January, and then we will be on to talking to some of the other states that are going to be conducting their surveys. So this will probably be the last time we talk until 2021. So from all of us here at the Ducks Unlimited podcast, I just want to say thank you for your time and kind of sharing the results from your surveys with us. Sometimes we have to go through a bit of technical difficulties in order to connect on these shows, but you've been very patient and persistent. We appreciate that. And from all of us here, we want to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and look forward to catching up with you sometime next year, Aaron.
All right. Well, thank you, and happy holidays to yourself.
A special thanks to our guest on today's episode, Aaron Yetter, waterfowl ecologist with the Forbes Biological Station, the Illinois Natural History Survey. We appreciate his time and sharing the results from their recent waterfowl survey. As always, we thank our producer, Clay Baird, for the great work that he does with these podcasts. And then to you, the listener, we thank you for your time and your support of the podcast, and most importantly, your support, passion, and commitment to wetlands and waterfowl conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.